Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. And we're going to continue with the evidence of Ms. Smith.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Yes,
Good morning, Mr. Millett.
May we please have Ms. Smith back?
Morning. Good morning. Before we get started, can I just say that I think it would be in everyone's interest, yours and ours as well, if we have slightly shorter periods of answering questions with short breaks in between. Would that suit you?
Yes, that would be fine.
Right. Well, then I'll ask Mr. Millett, perhaps try and find a convenient point around 11:15.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman.
And then we'll have a break and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
very
much. Yes. Good morning, Ms. Smith. Morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to take a little bit of a step back to some policy work that we looked at yesterday.
Okay.
So bear with me if there's anything you don't recognise or aren't familiar with. Can I start with a document that I think you referred to yesterday, but I'll be corrected if I'm wrong about that. And that's the National Stay Put Guidance. I'd like you to be shown the 2012 DCLG high-rise report, if I can summarise it, which is CTAR, and then there are 6 zeros, 33, and it's called Fire Safety and Purpose-Built Flats, and it was published by the DCLG in May 2012. And it followed the Lakenhall House fire inquest. Are you familiar with this document at all?
No.
Right. Let me see if I can just see whether you're familiar with the principle in it about stay put. If you could please be shown page 27 internally, under section 19, stay put policy. Well, let's go through it together. A stay put policy involves the following approach. First bullet, when a fire occurs within a flat, the occupants alert others in the flat, make their way out of the building and summon the fire and rescue service. If a fire starts in the common parts, anyone in these areas makes their way out of the building and summons the fire and rescue service. Third bullet, all other residents not directly affected by the fire would be expected to stay put and remain in their flat unless directed to leave by the fire and rescue service. That's a governmental summation of stay put in a government document in 2012 as a result of, or following on from, Lakenhall House.
Yes.
Or at least following on from the fire at Lakenhall House. Is that a familiar articulation, statement of the stay put policy in your experience?
So, when we were investigating the Lakenhall House incident, we refer to a booklet that was issued by DCLG to homeowners. That's not very different to the one that was issued. Okay.
Can we just look at the next page and just see if there's anything on there that we need to look at? And then at 19.2, and here's a double negative, not mine this time. It is not implied that those not directly involved who wish to leave the building should be prevented from doing so. Nor does this preclude those evacuating a flat that is on fire from alerting their neighbours so that they can also escape if they feel threatened. Is that a familiar statement?
No.
That is not a familiar statement?
No.
Right. Is that part... have you ever come across that?
No.
Approach? No.
No.
Right. And then 19.3, the alternative to a stay-put policy is one involving simultaneous evacuation. Is that something you're familiar with?
I've heard the terms stay put and simultaneous evacuation.
Okay. Are you familiar from training or your experience with the idea that the alternative to stay put is simultaneous evacuation, as bluntly as that?
No, and it wouldn't be something in a control room that control officers could achieve simultaneous evacuation.
Oh, okay. Right. Can I then ask you to look at policy 539, Appendix 3. And just to look a little bit more at the actual kinds of advice that are to be given under FSG. This is Appendix 3, to be found on internal page 16, or page 16 of the relativity document. And we looked at this yesterday, but I just want to go back to it if I can. It says in the fourth paragraph down, you are usually safest to remain in your premises unless affected by fire, heat, or smoke. If the situation changes, you should leave your premises and dial 999 if you need further assistance. Now, unless the words "unless affected by fire, heat, or smoke," in your experience as an SAP, would that mean, or would that be implemented as unless affected by either fire, or heat, or smoke, or a combination of any of those three?
No, one of them.
One of them. One of them is enough, is it?
Yes.
And if the caller says they are affected by smoke, for example,
Yes.
what does the FSG call handler do?
So that would, then they would ask why they were affected by heat or smoke.
Right.
So if the caller then said that they couldn't leave their premise, they didn't feel they could leave their premise because of the smoke, then we would go on to assess the situation and provide protection advice.
Right. But if you were told, there's smoke in my premises, it's smoky,
Yes.
and that's really all the information you had on a call, what advice would ordinarily be given?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances, but if a caller rang and said that there was smoke in their flat, and I think the operator may well ask us an additional question to say, is there fire in your flat? And depending on where the smoke is coming from, they would offer protection advice.
Right. So would it be normal then for the call handler to investigate the amount of smoke, the seriousness and density of the smoke, and where it was coming from?
Yes, by reassessment throughout the conversation.
Right. Okay. Can I ask you to look at a transcript of a call, which is LFB 60311. And it's a call. This is a transcript created by created for the inquiry, but it's timed at 01:30:38 on the 14th of June. And it doesn't matter for present purposes who the call handler is, okay, even though you may be able to guess. But
Yes.
I just wanted to show it to you. It's not a long call. The caller, I can tell you, is from the 22nd floor, because we get that from the transcript. And we think that it's flat 193 in Grenfell Tower. And operator says, fire brigade, caller, hello, it's from Grenfell Tower, yeah, and several inaudible words, the 22nd floor. Operator, you're on the 22nd. Yes, and there's all smoke now. So that's what the caller says. And the operator says, yeah, we are. You need to get to the window and get some fresh air, okay? And you can read on. Yeah, I'll let them know you're up there. So can you make sure we're, and operator, yeah, over speaking. Caller, like, do you actually know which floor it's a fire? There's a fire. Operator, it's a block, a flat on the 4th floor alight. Caller, yeah, well, our neighbour told us it's actually from inaudible. And, oh, I see, okay. And the operator goes on, yeah, well, we're there, and I'll let them know you're on the 20th, but you've just got some smoke up there, you're okay. And then there's some over-speaking. And then, though, yeah. Caller, yeah, we are still in the neighbour's house now. Oh, okay, all right, well, it's on the 20th, you're on the 20th. It's on the 4th. Caller says 22nd floor, operator 22nd, caller 22nd floor, yeah, all right, okay. And then there's over speaking. Operator, we are there, all right, I'll let them know, thank you. And then over the page, okay, bye, says the operator. And the caller says, over speaking, the flat query, sorry, do we stay in the flat? Operator, well, I obviously can't really advise you, but I'll let the fireman know you're there. Okay, okay, all right, okay, thanks, thank you, bye, bye. Now, a number of questions I've got for you about that call. First of all, were the questions that were being asked by the operator about the smoke enough, do you think, for the operator to get a good amount of information to be able to give accurate fire survival guidance to the caller?
I wouldn't really class that as a fire survival guidance call because she doesn't provide any advice with regard to that.
No.
So in terms, I would imagine that's a call we've received from Grenfell Tower. The operator still believes that the fire is on the 4th floor.
Right.
And again, the caller's saying that it's on the 22nd floor. So I wouldn't technically class that as a fire survival guidance call.
Okay.
It is a call from an individual in the building, obviously.
Right. Looking at the policy, though, would you say, going back to the expression, you're usually safest to remain in your premises unless affected by fire, heat or smoke, any one of those three, as you've said.
Yeah.
Would you say that the caller was telling the operator that their premises were affected by smoke?
I would say that there was smoke on the 22nd floor,
Yeah.
yes.
And wouldn't that mean, or let me ask it this way, would that mean that given that the caller was saying there was smoke in the flat, that it was not safe to remain in the premises?
I think at the end with the operator saying that she can't really advise you, we did let the firefighters on scene know that there were people on the 22nd floor, and I'm sure you've seen that from the short incident log.
Yeah, well, we can look at the short incident log as to what information was passed on.
Yeah.
And indeed, you're right, it was passed on at 01:32:29,
Yeah.
and the reference for the transcript, we can look at it, is page 18 in the short incident log. But I'm just focusing on the information that's passed to the operator by the caller. The caller says there's smoke in the flat, and says it a couple of times.
Yes.
And then asks for advice. And I'm just trying to work out with you whether, having been told that there's smoke in the flat, the policy is engaged whereby it's now not safe for the caller to remain in the premises because the flat is affected by smoke.
The flat is affected by smoke, so had that call progressed and they'd gone on to it being a fire survival guidance call, I would have expected the operator to assess the situation and offer advice to keep them safe. That may well have been, and probably would have been, to protect them in their own dwelling rather than leave the building.
Right. You say it wasn't a fire survival guidance call, but what would make it a fire survival guidance call in circumstances where the flat is already affected by smoke?
Yes, that they would actually have spoken to the caller and to get their to ask and provide advice and assess the situation. I think during this time, to just explain to you what was going on in the control room, there was a huge volume of calls coming in. I think we would have been handling over 100 within that hour, all from people within the tower wanting advice. I would imagine that the operators were trying to get to everyone as quickly as possible and offer advice about what they can do and update them on the situation about where the fire was.
Yes, this is, and this comes from the operational response report. This is the 33rd 999 call into Brigade Control. But just as an example, I'm just trying to get a handle on what would be the difference between, as it were, an ordinary 999 call or a fire survival guidance call. What makes the difference between one and the other?
A fire survival guidance call between an ordinary 999 call.
Yes.
Sorry. Could you
So,
repeat
well,
the
let me
question?
try it a different way. Here's the call. We've seen the transcript. The operator is told there is smoke in the flat. My question is, looking back at the policy, which says you're usually safest to remain in your premises unless affected by smoke,
Yes.
why is that not a fire survival guidance call, which would require, or at least suggest to the operator that they should be advising the occupants to leave?
So I think if you go back to the definition of a fire survival guidance call, the fire survival guidance call actually kicks in when a caller believes they're unable to leave their premise due to the effects of fire, heat and smoke. So that would be when we would provide those 4 principles of assess, advice,
Right.
protect and rescue.
I see. So is it actually a more staged approach? The caller calls. If the caller says, I'm affected by smoke, that doesn't become a fire survival guidance call unless it then emerges that not only is there smoke in the flat or fire or heat, but that the caller also can't escape.
Yes.
Right. Now, before you get to that, at that stage, that no escape stage, that's when fire survival guidance kicks in.
Yes.
Right. Now, before you get to that stage, this intermediate stage where there is smoke in the flat, the policy says you're usually safest to remain in your premises unless affected by fire, heat or smoke. So that would indicate that when there's smoke, the next stage, stage 2 if you like, is escape if you can safely.
Yes.
That's right, is it?
Yes.
Right. Now going back then to the transcript of the call we've just been looking at, we don't see that the operator says, well, given that you've got smoke in your flat, can you escape safely? Let's
No.
explore that. Now, is that a deficiency in the advice being given, do you think?
I wasn't there at the time,
I know.
but I can only imagine the situation, and I really would believe that that individual would have known that they were on the 22nd floor, that the fire was on the 4th floor,
Right.
and that actually there might be callers lower down that did need fire survival guidance help.
Right.
And actually, they would have also been concerned because they wouldn't have known what was going on in the building, that actually had they asked them to leave and evacuate, they would have put them into a more dangerous situation by sending them down a stairwell to past the 4th floor, which was on fire.
I understand that. And that leads on to another question, which is when assessing, together with the caller, at that stage 2, before you get to fire survival guidance, properly so called as you described it, at that
Yes.
stage 2, we're making the assessment about escape. How does the control room operator make an assessment about the safety of an escape route unless they've got information from the incident commander?
Yes, they can't do that. That is just a pure conversation with the caller, and it would be between us and the caller asking them about the situation. That is the only assessment they can make.
So we've seen this transcript, and coming back to the last page where the operator says, in answer to the question, do we stay in the flat? So we're still at stage 2, routes of escape. Well, obviously I can't really advise you, but I'll let the fireman know you're there, okay. My question is, was that the kind of advice you would expect an operator to be given, or would you expect the operator, looking at the policy, to say, well, can we now examine what your escape routes are and whether they are safe together?
I would imagine that when she said, I can't really advise you, that was forethought in her mind, that she didn't want to send them down into a corridor that may be heavily smoke-filled into a worse situation. Right. I believe she made an assessment at that time that they were on the 22nd floor and the fire was on the 4th floor.
Right. I know you weren't on this call, and indeed you weren't even... No. You were en route at this stage, I think,
yes.
Just about.
Yeah.
So you weren't there, so I'm not asking you about your personal involvement in the call. But
it would be very early on in the incident. I think we only started to receive fire survival guidance calls or provide guidance to people at 1:20. Was it the first call we received?
About that, yes.
Yeah.
My question really is this, and I'll leave it there. Is the advice that she gives, obviously I can't really advise you, in line with policy, where the policy seems to require an assessment of escape? possibilities?
I would say every call is different. That policy is a guideline for us to go through the stages. Again, with the amount of calls coming in, she would have made a decision about where they were in the premise and believed them to be safe
Right.
where they were.
Would it be usual practice in the control room to leave matters there, or would it be usual practice in the control room to go on to explore means of safe escape?
It would have been usual practice to go on and explore means of escape, but that would be if we were receiving 1 or 2 calls and not the large volume of calls for help that we were receiving on that night.
Right, so the usual practice is, yes, you would, but the unusual volume of calls meant that there was a departure from that practice. Is that what I take?
I wouldn't
from
say
your
all the
answer?
time, no. I would say on this call, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, excuse me, can I ask you to look at a different document? You mentioned, I think, 1093 yesterday, a
Yes.
number of times in your evidence, and we looked at references to that in paragraph, I think, 5.19 of policy 539. Can I ask you to look at the document that you referred to? So there's a point in it I just want to ask you about. And this is LFB 00003617. Just looking at it on the page or on the screen, is that a document you're familiar with?
Yes.
Right. Is that the one you were referring to yesterday?
Yes.
Right. I just want to ask you about one sentence, and if you think I'm taking it out of context, please tell me. But it's quite a long document, and I don't want to spend time reading it out to you. But it's a document dated 12th of October 1993 from the Home Office, who at that stage had responsibility for fire and rescue. Paragraph 2. Paragraph 1 refers to training of fire control staff and refers to the aim being to equip staff with the basic knowledge which would enable them to give advice, get out, close the doors, etc. Paragraph 2 says this: while this approach is adequate in the vast majority of cases, in some cases a different approach may be needed. In the situation where, for example, the caller is prevented from escaping due to location, such as high-rise flats, and or smoke density, or some other reason is in danger, the operator taking the call may need to give very specific safety instructions in addition to establishing the location of the incident for mobilizing purposes. And then it says this: additionally, in circumstances such as these, a fire control operator may need to take into account that the normal procedure of calming the caller may not be appropriate and may even be dangerous in some circumstances. That last sentence, to your knowledge, did that ever come into policy, LFB policy, during your time with the LFB?
So that's prior to the Lacknell House fire.
It is.
That was in our policy, and that was removed after, in 2011.
It was until 2011?
Yes.
And do you know why it was removed?
Yes, because we recognise that sometimes the process, as it says there, of calming the caller may lull them into a false sense of security, and that's why we replaced that with the reassessment from our control staff.
Right.
Also, further on in the document, it refers to, in the training manual that all our control staff have,
Yes.
it refers to following advice given by the government on high-rise buildings.
It does,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. Okay. So I think just so I can understand your answer, it was replaced with this reassessment approach, whereby you reassess, talk, calm, and also gather information.
Yeah, so prior
that
to
we saw in the RIF
2011, there was a heavy influence on talking to the caller, exchanging names, trying to distract them from the situation they were in, rather than reassess the situation. So
Right.
after 2011, we changed that, and we changed our training to reflect that the control officer should focus more on the reassessment and the worsening of conditions rather than sharing names and a distraction technique.
I see. So I think what you're saying is, in fact, the post-2011 policy did take account of this advice that we saw in 1993, namely that calming the caller isn't necessarily the best thing to do, and it's all about gathering information.
Yes, after 2011, our current training is in line with that.
Right. So can I understand? So when we see the reference to reassurance in the RIF
Yes.
and in Policy 539,
Yeah.
and I think you said this yesterday, but just to be clear, that is it in the context of the priority being the gathering of information and the giving of practical advice?
Yes, but as I explained before, that's quite a linear approach to look at it. And obviously, if someone is ringing up on the telephone call very distressed, upset, and you can't get an address out of them when you first try, then you will try a reassuring technique before and trying to calm the caller.
Yeah. I see. Can I ask you now to look at a document we looked at yesterday, which is the GRA, the Generic Risk Assessment 3.2 from February 2014, which we'll find in the policy bundle at tab 7. We looked at this yesterday, and I know you're not familiar with it as a document, but again, just to give you a reassurance. I'm not going to ask you about the actual document itself. I'm just going to ask you about some of the principles in it. If you turn, first of all, please, to page 17 internally, this is within the part of this document which starts a number of pages before, called Key Control Measures and Planning. And this is national, as it says, National Guidance 2014, put out by the DCLG. And on this page, it says contingency plans for particular premises should cover, and there are two things at the top of the bullet point list: fire spread beyond the compartment of origin and the potential for multiple rescues. And then underneath it, an operational evacuation plan being required in the event the stay put policy becomes untenable. And my question is, looking particularly at the second, as an SOM, when you're dealing with a high-rise fire, what assumptions do you make as to the existence of any operational evacuation plan in the event that stay put fails for that building?
I wouldn't say we do. Every incident is different, and being in the control room, I believe we plan, and I think if you refer to my statement later on, after we were receiving that large amount of calls, we were also thinking about other issues that could happen at that incident, what resources we'd need. That's part of our function. So it's a constant update and planning, thinking about a range of alternative things that could happen. So it's never focused on one particular item. It wouldn't be focused on an operational evacuation plan, but it would be focused on how we could support the incident if they wanted to introduce an operational evacuation plan.
I see. Okay. I mean, I think that answers my question for the most part. Let me try it a different way. Would you always assume, in the case of any fire in any given high-rise block, that there is an available alternative plan, namely evacuation, which could be called upon in the event the stay-put policy became untenable?
No, we would always assume, with a large majority of incidents and high-rise, that we would be able to keep the callers calm and reassured and provide protection advice until the firefighters either extinguish the fire or reach them.
Right, I see. So I think let me try this question a slightly different way one more time. Would you ever think to yourself as an SOM, well, there's a fire in a high-rise block, I'm not going to worry about it because if compartmentation fails, there's an operational evacuation plan in place as an alternative? Would that be part of your thinking?
No. Not that I wasn't going to worry about it, no.
No.
That it would be part of my thinking and was on the night.
It would be part of your thinking. You would think there is an alternative.
I would think there's an
evacuation plan
alternative. I wouldn't, sorry, that it's the confusion with regard to operational and incident ground with regards to what I do in the control room.
And I think the thrust of Mr. Millett's question, if I've understood it correctly, is whether you would have at the back of your mind at least that it might be necessary to get everyone out and there ought to be a plan to do that. Does that reflect your question?
Yes.
Yes, from the control room.
You would
such as changing the advice.
You would make that
Yes.
assumption?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's thank you, Mr. Chairman, for clarifying that. Can I then turn to page 20? It's a similar question, with a slightly different angle. Here we have a bullet point list on the first part of the page, which starts the page before. And I should just show you the page before, page 19. It starts training, which will cover high-rise incidents must include. And then, if you turn to page 24, bullet points up from the end of the list, it says evacuation and casualty removal tactics. Incident commanders should understand when a partial or full evacuation strategy might become necessary in a residential building where a stay-put policy is normally in place. First of all, were you aware that advice or imperative, if you like, was part of national policy?
In what context? In this written into the GRA?
Yeah. Well, never mind the GRA. Were you aware that there was national guidance which required training to cover what we see in that bullet point, namely that incident commanders should understand when a full or partial evacuation strategy should become necessary?
Yes, operationally.
Yeah. Now, the question is then, do you as an SOM in the control room rely on the incident commander to consider and then advise you as to whether a partial or full evacuation strategy might be necessary in a building where stay put is in place?
Well, that is written into policy 790, but as we spoke about before,
Yeah.
I believe it should be a joint conversation, an update of information prior to that decision being made.
Yes, absolutely. But is it right that you're reliant on the incident commander and his or her understanding as to when a partial or full evacuation strategy might be necessary?
Well, with regard to a partial or full evacuation strategy, you would be relying on individuals on scene, so yes, the incident commander. With regard to a change in stay-put policy from helping keep people safe to telling them to leave, that would be down to the control room, because only the control room operators would be able to engage with those callers and only those callers,
Yeah.
not talk to every individual in that building.
Yes.
So it's slightly different.
Yes, I understand. And in that connection, I think that takes me to the next part of this document, page 18, going back a bit. A third of the way down page 18. It covers fire survival guidance call arrangements. And this part also sits in the section of this document about planning. But it says this: fire survival guidance call arrangements should include, and then the last bullet point is how information will be exchanged between callers, fire control and commanders at the incident. And note the word exchange there. My question is, what would you expect to be the arrangements for exchange of information between fire control and commanders at the incident?
With regard to passing of fire survival guidance information,
Well, with regard to exchange, so I understand where we are with fire control talking to commanders at the incident. My question is in relation to information coming back the other way. What would you ordinarily expect there to be by way of arrangements for commanders at the incident passing information to fire control?
I would have expected on a smaller scale incident that there to be an update with regard to an FSG call if it was a prolonged call and they were having difficulty reaching that floor.
Right. So ordinarily, in the ordinary case, you would expect there to be a two-way street?
Not so much a two-way street, but sufficient information just about the progress.
Okay. Of a particular call?
Of a particular call,
Right.
yes.
And then, finally, on this document, page 29, four paragraphs down from the top, and this sits within a section called Fire Survival Guidance, which starts on the page before. In the fourth paragraph on page 29, it says, the advice offered to callers to remain in their property during fire survival guidance calls must be re-evaluated throughout an incident. Where circumstances make it necessary, an incident commander may need to consider changing the advice given. For example, callers may need to be advised to leave their property or to be guided from it by firefighters. And the incident commander should also consider making use of all available systems within the building to communicate with occupants. Now, I just want to focus with you on the sentence, where circumstances make it necessary, an incident commander may need to consider changing the advice given. Now, since the incident commander, as you told us, is not the person communicating with the caller, is it the case that in order to change the advice given, the incident commander has to communicate with the control room?
Yes.
Right. And unless the incident commander communicated with the control room in relation to any particular fire survival guidance call, where the advice needed to be changed, the advice couldn't be changed.
No.
Right. Thank you. Right. Okay. Now, can I then go back to where I think I'd left off last night, after that little deviation? And Mr. Chairman, it's rather disappointing for me to say this, but maybe this may be an appropriate point for a break.
Well, it had passed through my mind as well. If you're going to something different, it might be sensible
It is something different than where we were last night.
have a short break now. All right, well, we'll take a short break, a little earlier than I suggested. We'll come back at 11:15, just over 5 minutes, all right?
Thank
So
you.
go with the usher, don't talk to anyone about your evidence, please, during the break. Thank you very much. Right, 11:15 then, please.
question.
All right, happy to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for coming back. Mr. Chairman, I have something to say, not a question for the witness, but on instructions or by request from someone with instructions on behalf of the caller who made the call.
Yes.
The transcript of which I showed Miss Smith just before the break. It's the call from the 22nd floor at 01:30:38. And I'm asked to say, and I think it's right that I do, that is the call from Naomi Lee, who lived at flat 195. By the time of the call at 01:30:38, she had moved to her neighbour's flat 193, and that's the home of Nadia Chouker and Basim Chouker. It's important, right. I think, I do understand why I'm asked to say that. It's important for those who aren't necessarily here to understand
yes.
that these aren't just numbers, they are people's homes.
Of course, yes. Yes. All right, well, thank you very much for clarifying that.
Yes. Ms. Smith, can we now go back to your transit, as it were, to the control room on the night of the fire?
Yes.
On page 3 of your witness statement, you said that 5 minutes from Stratford, Adam informed me that the fire had been upgraded yet further to a 40-pump incident, and unprecedented. First of all, Adam, that's Adam Crinion, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Right. And he occupied the role, well, what was his role?
So his role is Senior Operations Manager, the same as me.
Right.
And on that night, he was paged as well because he was shadowing me. He joined the organisation in May 2007, so he was shadowing me.
Okay, and he was also en route at the same time, I think?
He was. I believe the control room paged him.
Yes, as you say. And he told you that the fire had been upgraded. How were you told that? Did he call you on your
Mobile? I believe so, yes.
But you were driving, so how did you receive the call?
I have hands-free.
Hands-free?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it wasn't a... trying to trap you into some...
That's okay.
...motoring offence. All right. But my point is, it wasn't over your...
airwave radio, no.
Airwave radio, no. Okay. And you say my role in such circumstances is one of oversight. What do you mean by that?
So whenever we come into an incident, we're obviously not there at the beginning of the incident, so we come in halfway through, and it really is support to the staff and the supervisors at the back of the room.
Yeah.
We receive a number of calls, as I've already said, from senior managers and maybe press wanting to know some updated information, and we can take those calls off the supervisors to let them focus on mobilising and responding to resource requests.
Yes, I see. And you say that. When you were told that it was a 40-pump fire, what were your thoughts?
That it was a large fire.
Is it something you've ever experienced before?
Not when I've been on duty. So we have had a 40-pump fire before, but I've not been on duty for it. I've not been.
Right. And you say we've had a 40-pump fire. That's the LFB, is it?
The LFB, sorry.
Right. Which was that? Do you know?
I believe it was an incident in Stratford.
In Stratford?
Yes.
Right. Okay. And when was that? Do you know?
2012.
Yes. Okay. And what was it that required the attendance of 40 pumps? Do you remember?
No.
Okay. And faced with the 40-pump fire, did you have any thoughts about what needed to be done in the control room once you arrived, or even before you arrived?
No, I couldn't imagine. I knew they were receiving multiple fire survival guidance calls. I knew that a 40-pump fire is more than 40 fire engines to be mobilised. There's an awful lot of additional appliances and resources, informing of officers, mobilising those that needed to be done. So I knew that they would need some support.
Okay. Now, if I can ask you to go, please, to page 86 of the ORR. the operational response report, and look at the timestamp for 015721, it records that you call Brigade Control by telephone and speak to AOM May and ask for an update. Do you remember doing that?
No.
I'll go on and see if this triggers it. AOM May explains it's quite difficult to get a handle on things because it's so busy, but says they are taking a lot of FSG calls. SOM Smith asks if callers are staying on the line, and AOM May says he knows of at least one. She reports she is at the Elephant and Castle and en route. Do you remember speaking to Peter Main at about Elephant and Castle?
I do. I didn't realise I was at Elephant Castle. I thought I was much nearer.
Right, okay.
That
Right.
may have been when I spoke to Adam on the telephone.
Okay. And again, you asked if callers are staying on the line. Is that because that would indicate that that was a fire survival guidance call in progress?
Yes.
As you told us yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. And what answer did he give you? He says this records him saying that he knew of at least one. What did that tell you? What did that inform you of?
That one of our control officers had been on the phone
Right.
to a caller for some considerable time.
And did you know what advice was being given to callers as part of that FSG advice?
No, I would assume the 4 principles that we've talked about previously.
Right, okay.
I couldn't tell you for definite.
Okay. And what assumptions did you make, if any, about whether stay put advice was still being given?
I didn't at that time.
Sorry,
I didn't make any assumptions.
you didn't make any assumptions, one way or the other?
No.
Okay. Now, I think we've got one more call that you made while en route to Adam Crinian. If I can just show you that. That is in the LFB log. It's a slightly different document. It's tab 7 of the documents bundle, LFB document number 3. And at 020409, we see message from incident CU8 make pumps 40. Sorry, I put the question originally to you wrongly. But looking at that time mark, do you remember that the command message from the incident, make pumps 40, had come from CU8?
No.
Okay. Now, do you remember, while en route, whether you were told that Group Manager Welch was now in attendance?
No.
Okay.
And that wouldn't have been something that I would have been told.
Okay. Now, in your statement, going back to it, at page 3, third paragraph on page 3, you say, when I arrived, I could see that absolutely everyone was on the phones. We're trying to get a time for your arrival, because obviously you don't book in as status 3 because you're not attending the incident. Is there another way of recording your arrival formally at the incident, at the control room?
Yes, so someone could enter it on the log as just a message, and I think after I'd arrived and spoken to the supervisor and everything, I think Debbie Reel may have added it to the log. I believe my arrival time was around 2:15.
Yes.
And I think she added it to the log at about 2:20.
And if we go to page 22 of the short incident log at tab 23 of the documents bundle, I think we do see that. 2233, DR, as you rightly say, Debbie Real. User comment, BCO2, we know that's you,
Yeah.
in attendance at control.
Yes.
Okay. So Debbie adds that. Is that normal? So when an SOM arrives in the control room?
Yes, they would log it on the,
right.
on the instant log.
Okay. And do you know how long after you arrived that she logged it? Because you think you arrived at 2:15, you say. She logs that.
2:22.
2:22.
Yeah.
That would mean there's about 7 minutes difference. How can you account for that?
They were all extremely busy.
Right.
I would imagine it just gone 40 pump fire, hadn't it? By then, so they were probably still doing all the peripheral standby moves, making sure we had fire cover. I believe Debbie took a number of calls as well.
Right. And on page 3 of your statement, just going back to it, you say you made your way to the duty supervisor and immediately said, "Are you okay? What can we do to help?" And who was the duty supervisor?
That's just an error. It meant the supervisory desk.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Who was there? Who was on it?
Debbie Real, Pete May, and Alex Norman.
Okay. And you then spoke to the officer of the day, Jason Olive, you say, who had already present passing information about callers to the command unit. And what did he say to you? Do you remember what he said to you?
I think I just acknowledged him, said hello. I could gather that he was passing fire survival guidance information, and I think Alex also told me that she'd asked Jason to ring the command unit and pass the fire survival guidance information that they had been receiving.
Right. And did you have any greater or wider conversation with Alex Norman at that point?
I may have done.
Right.
I can't recall the specific detail.
Right. You can't remember what she said to you?
I think she told me that that's what Jason was doing.
Okay.
And I had gathered that already because I'd walked past him whilst entering the room and could hear him on the telephone passing information.
Did you, either at that stage or afterwards, have a discussion with Alex Norman about the stay-put advice?
Not at that stage. That would have been 10 minutes later.
10 minutes later, okay. But you did have a discussion, did you, with Alex Norman at about 2:25, I suppose?
Yes.
You arrive at 2:15, she logs you in at 2:22, Debbie Real, and then... So about 2:25 you have that conversation with her, do you? And was anybody else involved in that conversation when you first had it with Alex Norman?
With Alex, no, it was more following a decision about what we were going to do. And I asked her to go around the room and speak to all the control room officers individually with regard to the change in advice.
Right. So you asked Alex Norman to go around the room and ask all the CROs who were on calls a question?
No, I asked her to tell the CROs that we were going to change the advice and what advice to give out to callers.
Okay. Right. I'm going to come... Can I just freeze that there and
Yes.
come back to it? When you spoke to Jason Olive, as you say in the third line, did you speak to him about the stay-put advice?
No.
Okay. When you came into the control room, did you see a whiteboard system in operation?
No.
You didn't? No.
I believe that came in when Adrian Fenton arrived.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say, 4 lines up from the bottom of the page, you say, we utilised a whiteboard system to log call data of the most badly affected flats. So when did that start? You just said when Adam Fenton arrived.
So from memory, Adrian arrived 5 minutes after me. I, at that time, was with Pam, and then I spoke to Peter. Adrian had arrived in control. I'm not sure if he'd probably spoken to Alex and maybe Jason, and he began to move some whiteboards that were in the corner that we use for our secondary mobilising, and write the flats and the information on those whiteboards.
Okay. Now, before the whiteboard system was implemented, what do you remember was the system of recording FSG, calls coming in, the details of those calls, and the nature of the advice being given to callers?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
When you arrived in the
Yes.
control room, what was the system of recording the calls that were coming in, the nature of those calls, and the advice being given to callers?
So we were collecting the call information, we were making a call of it, so an incident of it, we were logging it on the incident log, and any details about the caller's situation, their location, we were updating the incident log. We probably created some service requests,
Right.
looking at the incident log, and we made sure that information was passed to Jason Olive, who would then pass it on to the command unit. By that time, a system had already been set up in place. I couldn't tell you if it was Alex collecting that additional information or control officers making sure that Jason Olive had it.
Okay. Apart from entering information onto the incident log
Yes.
electronically, what other logs or written records were being kept in the control room about calls or of calls at the moment you arrived, at the time you arrived?
I believe there was some paper. I can only speak for after I arrived.
Right.
So we wrote information down on paper.
Right.
And made sure that it was duplicated on the whiteboard. Jason was sitting right beside the whiteboard, so he could easily reel that off when that was updated.
Okay, but before I think you said that the whiteboard system was implemented only once.
Yeah.
Once Adrian Fenton arrived.
Yeah.
But before that, was there a system of recording information by writing it down on pieces of paper as well as entering it into the
I can
log?
only assume that there was, because it was quite a smooth operation when I was arriving there. The information was going to Jason Olive, and he had a list of information that he was giving out.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you how that was getting to him.
Right, and that list, was it a written list?
Possibly.
Did you see it?
No.
Okay, right. Now, when we come to the whiteboard system, which starts after Adrian Fenton arrives, and we jump ahead in time, I think. Well, can I ask you this? The whiteboard system, was that introduced before or after the change in the stay put policy?
I would imagine that was at the similar time,
Okay.
maybe a little bit before that information started to be written on whiteboards.
Okay. Now, at the bottom of page 3, you say, we utilised a whiteboard system to log call data of the most badly affected flats so that it was easier for the CROs to relate to should any further calls come in from the same properties or numbers.
Yeah.
The whiteboard system would not have been normal procedure, but instead was a case of thinking on our feet to ensure the correct information was known at the relevant times, you say, because the volume of information that was coming in was so quick it needed to be displayed immediately. I've read that all to you because I've got a number of questions. First of all, if a flat wasn't considered to be badly affected, how was the information recorded?
It was recorded in the same way we recorded everyone's details. I think that's just bad wording on my part in my statement.
So when you say...
It didn't mean to highlight that we weren't recording everyone's information from those callers. We were.
I follow. So when we read the words to log call data of the most badly affected flats...
It was all the flats.
It was all the flats.
But we were also conscious that we'd received a number of calls, or LFB had received a call, and then the Met Police had rung us with a call from the same caller in the same flat.
Right.
So I think when I refer to that, I'm referring to actually there's been occasions where a caller's called back several times with the conditions worsening, and we'd updated that on our whiteboard list.
Okay, so I understand it. You keep a whiteboard list of all the calls, but as the repeat calls come in with the worsening conditions, you update the whiteboard as you go.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Did that information that was transferred to the whiteboard then get passed to the relevant command unit?
Yes. So as we were updating them, it was the system. The control officers that were on the phone that had taken updated or new information were writing it down, as well as writing it down on the system or writing it down on paper. I was going around collecting the paper. I was checking with the whiteboard, and so was Adrian,
Right.
that we knew we had that, updating any additional information, and Jason Olive was sitting by the whiteboard passing that information
Okay,
to the command unit.
that's very helpful. Can I just see if I can just put further colour onto that very clear picture you've just given us? So, and this is within the control room, once the whiteboard system is in operation,
Yes.
a call comes in, it's handled by our CRO, and correct me if I get any of this wrong.
Okay.
Okay. The CRO then inputs the updated information into the log. Is
Yes.
that right? Okay.
Yes.
Does the CRO then also record new information or different information on a piece of paper?
The same information, or maybe a bit more detail, just because they can scribble it quite quickly
Right.
on that piece of paper. Sometimes when we were walking past, and there would have been different, I think Alex did this as well on occasions, that we would actually overhear, because control officers have a technique of when they're trying to relay information for a conversation, that they will ask the caller a question and then repeat what the caller was saying back. So sometimes I overheard what the callers were saying,
Right.
and the location, so I was able to take those details down and check that we had them on the whiteboard and they were updated.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a visual picture in my head. So you've got the CRO with the screen in front of them, telephone on their
Headset. On there,
and they've also got a pen and paper. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And the paper, is that the control information form?
No.
That's just a blank piece of paper, is
Yes.
it? Right. And they're writing, and you're walking around hearing, but also writing on a pad, are you?
Yes. So
Right.
I have some paper. Sometimes I take it from the control officers and take it over to the whiteboard, make sure that information's there.
Okay.
Sometimes I overhear it and confirm that we've got that information.
Okay. And the transmission of the pieces of paper to the person at the whiteboard, who was doing that?
Me
You.
And Alex, I think by the time it progressed somewhat, so Adam and Scott would have been assisting with this as well. I couldn't say for definite.
That's Scott Hayward.
Yes.
Right. And so the pieces of paper then come to the person who's running the whiteboard, which was who?
I believe by that time, Adrian, there was another station manager or watch manager in the control room as well who was doing that. I can't recall his name.
I see. Okay. What about Jason Olive?
He was still on the phone talking to the command unit.
Right. So he's on the... I was going to come to him. I'm just trying to get an idea of the passage of the pieces of paper to the people at the whiteboard. So pieces of paper get taken to the personnel running the whiteboard,
Yeah.
who's, you think, Adam and Scott.
Not running the whiteboard, they were also collecting information.
Sorry. Right. And who's running the whiteboard?
I believe a watch manager or a station manager.
Who was that?
I don't know his name.
Right. And what about Adrian Fenton?
Adrian was there too. He was writing on the whiteboard too.
Right.
I wrote on the whiteboard sometimes.
Okay.
So it was just a case of updating it. Adrian was also on the phone to the incident ground.
Right. Okay. And then Jason Olive and sometimes Adrian Fenton are on the phone to the incident ground. Now you said Jason Olive. He's
Jason
using
is on the
his
phone
mobile
constantly.
constantly.
I didn't see him get off the phone. It was a constant update. It
And
was an
where's-
open line.
Where's he getting the information?
He's getting the information from the whiteboard.
Right. Okay. So it goes, in summary, it goes telephone call, pieces of paper, pieces of paper taken by you, up to the whiteboard. The whiteboard then reflects the information on the pieces of paper, and then that is transmitted by Jason Olive on his mobile to the relevant command unit.
Yes.
That's it, is it?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. In terms of transmission of the information to the CU, we have Jason Olive doing that by mobile. Is that then also recorded by anybody in the control room into the incident log?
Yes.
How is that done?
So sometimes some operators would have done that via a service request, like the ones we looked at yesterday.
Okay.
Others, it would have been just a user comment on the screen.
So how would can you give me an idea of how this would work physically? You have Jason Olive on the phone to CU, let's say CU7 by this stage.
Yes.
2:30. Let's say CU7. I think all calls are supposed to run through CU7 by 02:23:33. How does Jason Olive communicate to any of the CROs the information which is to go into the incident log, which he's passing to CU7?
He doesn't. He has it on the whiteboard as well.
Right. So where is the person who is inputting the information into the log getting the information from?
That would be the caller. So the control operator would be inputting the information into the log whilst they were talking to the caller and providing advice and guidance.
So by way of example, see if we can get this one right. We have, if we look at the short incident log, tab 23, page 22, and this is after you're there, and I'm trying to find an example close to 2:30, and perhaps the best example is page 23 at the top, where we have 02:29:31, service request created, RT4 to CU8, flat 142 on the 17th floor.
Yep.
And that's a creation of a service request by Heidi Fox, HJF.
Yes.
And then that service request is completed a couple of minutes later at 02:31:07 by Sharon Darby. You can see the same rubric. Now that information there, how does Sharon Darby know whether to complete the service request, given that it's Jason Olive on a mobile who's doing the speaking?
So either she would have transmitted that message,
Yes.
or she was in the centre of the room. She was 2 positions away from the whiteboard.
Right.
So she would have been over to here. Stratford is it's a smaller location than Merton, and you were able to have visible eyesight with everyone, and you can hear conversations and contact. I would have expected, if she didn't put that information over the radio, that she would have known that Heidi had already mentioned it, and we had already passed that information and recorded that information on the whiteboard. Sharon could have seen that from where she was sitting.
Right.
Easily.
So you've got the station manager, I think, in CU7. And let's ignore for the moment the problem created by the reference to CU8 there. Let's
Yes.
assume that it's been corrected by Sharon Darby when doing the call. She's the radio operator, so she's passing this message to the command unit by RT4.
Yeah, she may well have done, but she also might have just completed it because she knew that we already had that information and that all information was being passed to CU7 via Jason Olive.
I see.
You will have to check the...
So was she listening out to Jason Olive passing the information to the command unit?
Yes, part of that happens day to day in the control room.
Right.
Radio operators are listening out for what the callers are saying, what call takers are saying, and what else is going in the room.
Right. I'm just trying to get a feel for how Sharon Darby and Jason Olive are working together. Because it looks as if they're both passing the same information to the command unit at the same time. Jason Olive by mobile, Sharon Darby by RT4.
Yeah, so
Is that right?
Sharon could have, or she could have seen that information was up on the whiteboard
Right.
and known the system that we had in place, that Jason was reading the whiteboard and passing that information to CU7.
Right, I see. So you've got a double system, have you? You've got the information going to the whiteboard.
I would like to think it's a single system, but Sharon might have picked that up and passed that. But you could check the call recordings to see if she did that. I would imagine at that time she wasn't. She was just completing it, and the information was going only through one point, which was Jason Olive, after we'd collected it.
Right. Okay. Do you know whether Jason Olive was speaking to the command unit officer? Sorry, I'll try this again. In terms of the command unit officer who was receiving the information from the control room, was that person receiving it by mobile from Jason Olive and by radio from Sharon Darby? Or was it a different person in the command unit?
I would imagine it would have been a different person in the command unit. I
Right.
don't think you could have talked on the telephone and responded to the radio at the same time.
So
But again, I would imagine by that time that all information about people trapped and stuck in their flats was going via the whiteboard in control via Jason Olive to CU7 and not going via the radio. At one point I have a conversation with Sharon and she's extremely frustrated because she can see the high number of calls coming in, but obviously there's no radio traffic at the moment because we're passing it all through CU7 by voice. And she just wants to get in and help her colleagues, but she's extremely frustrated because she knows she's got to remain on the radio. So I would imagine by that time that had happened.
So is it, from that answer, can we just follow that up? Does that mean that where we read in the incident log where a service request is created and completed by Sharon Darby, in fact, that actually is a record of the mobile telephone call made by Jason Olive to the command unit, and not a record of a radio transmission from Sharon Darby to the command unit?
At that point, I would imagine that Sharon has just completed that service request to stop it getting into the list. So service requests build up in a list, and obviously once the message is completed, we send it. She would have completed it because she would have known or believed that that information had gone via the whiteboard to CU7.
Right, okay. And when does Sharon Darby stop sending messages herself?
I can't recall that time. I just know that conversation I had with her at one point during the night.
So is it right to summarise it this way, that at some point, after the whiteboard system had been instituted, that radio transmissions from the control room stopped, and the only method of communication of FSG information to the fireground was via mobile, Jason Olive to the command unit?
Yes.
But a record was being kept of what those were by Sharon Darby completing service requests?
Yes, so some of the control officers would have still typed in that valuable information they were taking from callers and put them as a service request.
Right, okay. And
as normal habit would be.
Right.
That would just be habit forming.
Given the volume and torrent of fire survival guidance calls being passed by Jason Olive to the CU, do you know whether any of those got missed when being recorded by either Sharon Darby or the CRO in the incident log?
Did the CRO miss any recording of information?
Yeah.
Did our CROs?
Do you know whether they did or?
I don't know categorically, but I would be extremely surprised if they were. I would say no.
Right.
No information was missed by control.
You'd be supremely surprised if they were missed?
I would be very, yes.
Okay. And do you know, see, we've got a very good picture now of the communication within the control room and out of the control room. Do you know whether any information was coming back to the control room from the command unit via mobile to Jason Olive?
No. I wasn't aware of that. I don't know if he'd passed some updates and messages on to Adrian Fenton.
Right. Do you know whether there was any difficulty in the command unit passing back to Jason Olive by mobile any updates, changes on the fireground that command unit officer had knew about?
No, I don't. I never received any.
Okay. I'm going to look at one or two details of some particular chunks of information and just see how we go with those. Is now a convenient moment for a break?
I think it might be, Mr. Foote, yes. And I think possibly this occasion we'll be a little bit more generous to ourselves. If I said, I'll be very generous, 20 to 12, you are going to require this witness for quite a bit of the day, but...
I think all day. But, yes.
Well, you better warn me if I look as though I'm going to be too generous in terms of...
You're saying 20 minutes. If we say 15, does that cut into your leisure time?
No, it's just that it's more practical to have a clear time on the clock to work to, then everyone knows where they are.
Right, 20 to 12 is...
So I was going to err on the side of giving us an extra 2 minutes.
That's very good, which I'm eating up, I'm conscious. Right.
We'll say 20 to 12 this time.
Thank you.
Please don't talk about your evidence to anyone else. All right? You'd like to go to the usher, please. Right, safe enough? Well, 20 to 12, so please. Very prompt. I'm very glad. No, thank you.
Prisoner.
All right, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Smith, thank you for coming back. Can I ask you to help me with an exercise? We were talking about whether there was a possibility of doubling up with messages going both by radio and through the Olive mobile.
Yes.
If I can put it that way, off the whiteboard. Can I ask you first to look at the short incident log, page 23, and this is an example. So this is tab 23, page 23. And a service request created by Heidi Fox at 02/29/31, RT4 to CU8, flat 142 on the 17th floor, level, 5 adults including 2 elderly persons inside flat. And that you'll see that at 02/31/07, Sharon Darby completes that service request in exactly the same way. Can I ask you to look at tab 71 of the documents bundle, which is MET 000016906. And this is one of 2 photographs of the... Well, let me just ask you what it is, rather than me telling you. Ah. Right. What is that?
That's one of the whiteboards we use in Stratford Control.
Okay. We have a second one. I better just show you both so we've got the complete picture. It's the document before, in the tab before, which is MET 000016912. And there it is. So those are the 2 whiteboards, are they, that you have been telling us about?
Yes.
Yeah. So to go back to the first one that I showed you, which is 19606, we can see there on the left-hand side in the column flat 142, and then in the next column 17th. Do you see that?
(142), yes.
And then 17th, and then
yes.
Next to it, it says 5 adults.
Yes.
Now, that information is not as full as the service request that we were looking at page 13820, page 23, because it doesn't have the information about the 2 elderly persons inside the flat.
No.
Now, do you know why the whiteboard didn't capture that information? The service request and the completion of the request did, but the whiteboard didn't. Do you know why that is?
I would imagine because the whiteboard was that check-in system, so if we'd had it on a piece of paper to update it with 5 adults, then that would have been sufficient information for us to check that we had that flat recorded and that there were people inside on the 17th floor.
Right, but it wouldn't record the fact that of those 5 adults, 2 were elderly persons.
No, it obviously hasn't.
It didn't.
No.
So what would that mean for Jason Olive when Jason Olive was communicating the details to the fireground?
He may have overheard that, so that may have come via another piece of paper that contained that information.
Right.
And gone to Jason Olive, so he might have overheard that, or he might have just passed on 5 adults on the 17th floor in flat 142.
Do you know whether elderly persons were being prioritised in any way on the night?
No, that's from a control room. We would pass all the information. We wouldn't prioritise.
You wouldn't prioritise?
No.
did you think that there was some system of prioritisation at the incident ground?
To be honest, I think our focus was away from the incident ground. We were focusing on getting the information and dealing with the number of calls that were coming in. Operators were updating the incident. They can see on their X how many calls are waiting to be answered. That was often throughout the night, up to the 15, 20 calls waiting at a time. And they were trying to process that information, deal with callers at the same time that were extremely distressed, as you can imagine. So I don't think our focus or any of our focus was on the incident ground and what they were doing on the incident ground. We were contemplating what would happen next. Would they want more resources? Would something happen to the building, like it would collapse? That went through our minds, and what we'd be able to provide then, and what the impact would be. But we weren't. We generally tend not to speculate what happens on the incident ground. Our control room is our incident ground, so that's where our focus is on.
How important would it be to tell the incident ground that of 5 adults, 2 elderly persons were included in them?
They would have known that 5 adults were there.
Yes, but two were elderly. How important was it for the fire ground to know that of those 5 adults, 2 were elderly?
I can't answer that. You'd have to ask an incident commander who would prioritise that. I wouldn't know what that meant in terms of rescuing callers in a
If the
tower
white...
block.
Sorry.
I wouldn't know what that meant in terms of resources on the incident ground.
Mm-hmm. If the whiteboard only said 5 adults, but didn't have the additional information that of those 5, 2 were elderly, would that information on the whiteboard be incomplete in an important respect?
No, I think the main priority is that information has been transferred, and that the incident ground know that there are 5 adults, and we've taken a call from that. If you look at some of the detail in the other calls, I'm not sure how long that call lasted or whether they did call back. We would have a record of that, but had they, we might have updated it a bit more. As you can see, we've made some notes about other callers that we've spoken to on numerous occasions.
If the fire ground was prioritising elderly people or children or people with mobility difficulties, would it not be important for the fire ground to know which flats they were in?
Again, I'm not sure how the incident commander would, or the incident would prioritise,
No.
And the key information that we've given to them, as you can see, it was a vast amount to process. I would say that 5 adults on the 17th floor would be sufficient for them to know that we've received a call there and there are people inside that flat.
Have you had experience in the past, before Grenfell Tower, of systems of prioritisation of fire survival guidance callers?
No, like I say, all our information we've tried to pass across as quickly as we can to the incident ground.
Can I ask you to look at the... Sorry, before I ask you this, before your arrival, were you aware of any request by the incident ground to prioritise fire survival guidance calls?
No.
Can I ask you to look at the short incident log, sorry, the ORR at page 81. And we'll look together at the time mark of 01:50:49, which starts with Control Room Officer Adams. Telephones the CU believed to be CU8. Watch Manager Merrick answers the phone, and she relays the following FSG call information: flat 133, floor 16, and flat 182, 21st floor. And then it says this: CU request an idea of priority from Control, who confirm the following, and then they set out further information. CU ask if Control can prioritise calls based on smoke density going forward. Do you remember before your arrival, that was a request made by the command unit to control?
No, and I'm not sure how we would be able to achieve that. Because it's not one person talking to a caller or talking to numerous callers. There were 11 control room officers, each talking and held in different conversations with individual callers. I'm not sure how that they would be able to prioritise smoke density when everyone had a different view of what was going on and we were reassessing everyone's view in their house. One caller might think that was very dense, smoke in a bedroom, but another one might say it's not very. I'm not sure how we would have ever achieved that. So our main goal was to provide all the information with regard to individuals, where they were located and what floor they were on.
Right.
So in that case, we prioritised the basic information to send and to make sure that reached the fireground.
Either on your mobile en route or when you arrived, did anybody talk to you about a request from the command unit asking if you at control could prioritise calls?
No.
You don't remember a conversation about prioritisation?
No. But had they, I would have had a discussion with them about that.
I understand. Now, going back then to the whiteboard and the missing information about the elderly persons, I just want to, and I've asked this before, I just want to ask it again, perhaps a slightly different way. Would to your mind, would it not be important for the fireground to know that of particular people in respect of whom a fire survival guidance call is in operation, some of them are elderly or children or have mobility issues? Would that not be important information?
I would imagine that's part of the information gathering, and during a normal incident you would have expected that information and a lot more to go across if the crews were dealing with one or two or a few fire survival guidance calls. As I was saying, the amount of information that was coming in, the detail that we had to get and past that information could have gone via Jason Olive. He could have overheard that conversation, or we could have handed him a piece of paper. The whiteboard was a way of recording that information and updating it when we got more information.
If all that Jason Olive knew was what was written on the whiteboard, yes, and if that's all he communicated to CU8, would it not be a material omission from that information that those 5 adults included 2 elderly people?
I can see that may have been helpful to the incident ground. I don't think it's a particular admission. I think we managed to get the basics up there. Right. And again, as I've said, I'm not sure how they were prioritising on the incident ground and whether they needed more resources because there were 2 elderly people in that flat.
Looking a little bit higher up on the whiteboard, we have flat 83 on the 11th floor, disabled brackets blind brackets, and then next to 183, 21st floor, we've got 2 adults brackets preg brackets 3 children. It looks as though whoever was recording the information on this whiteboard was aware of the relevance of the information about who the people in these flats were. Were they elderly, were they blind, were they children? So would that be fair, that actually the scribe onto the whiteboard was aware that that was information which was relevant for the fireground to know?
Yes, and he would have collated that. So possibly who wrote that would have others, so they're in different handwriting.
Right.
So some of them, maybe that information would have come there and Jason Olive would have passed that information, but they would have scribed it. So flat 7-3 on the 20th, 2 adults, 22nd in stairwell. Yeah. They're not as detailed as the person that ascribed the above.
No, and that's why I ask you, that looking at the complete information so far as the makeup of those other flats are concerned, when it says 5 adults and omits the information elderly persons, that information, if it was passed over by Jason Olive without mentioning elderly people, would be materially, importantly, incomplete, wouldn't it?
Yes, but I'm not sure if the recording on the whiteboard, as I'm trying to say, was the full detail that got passed over to the CU. It may have just been the way some individuals updated the whiteboard.
Right. In fact, we have a radio message which shows that Sharon Darby not only completed this service request, but actually also radioed this message in full to CU7 at 2:30 and 42 seconds. And I wonder whether we can see the transcript of the radio message. It's LFB *000 2784. It's short. It's timed at 02:30:42. Control information, flat 142, CU7. So we can see that it has gone to CU7 and not CU8.
Yes.
So you're right about what you were saying yesterday. Now that confirms it. Charlie Uniform 7, flat 142 on the 17th, 17th floor level. 5 adults, including 2 elderly persons, are trapped inside. Over. And that's it. Do you know who the operator was? Looking at that and the short incident log.
Yes, Sharon Darby.
Sharon Darby. So, would it be the case that she sent that message by radio? We can see, but Jason Olive was also sending the message, albeit possibly incompletely, by mobile.
Yes,
So
that could have happened.
Right. So is that an example of what I call a double system of communication to the fireground in operation? One, Sharon Darby on the radio, and secondly, whiteboard, Jason Olive to the command unit.
Yes, they were both going to the same place, though.
Right. Okay. Now, can I just ask you to look at another one, which is 0240, same page, short incident log, page 23, at 024011, service request created by Heidi Fox. Caller states fire is now in flat 152, 4 adults and 5 children, ages 11 years to 3 years, and 1 pregnant lady are now trapped in flat. 153 unable to get out due to the smoke. And if I ask you to look at the whiteboard, first of all, tab 68, which is 00011692. You'll see 153, 18th floor. It says, I think 4 adults, 5 children. You see that?
Yes.
And when we look at the short incident log, we don't have on the whiteboard the details of the ages or the pregnancy or the reason for the inability to get out due to the smoke. So Again, would you say that the whiteboard information was importantly incomplete?
So like before, if we haven't got a radio transmission, or do you know if Sharon transmitted that? So if she transmitted it, she would have transmitted it in full, just as...
I'll come to that.
Mr. Miller, before you do, maybe I'm misunderstanding what I'm seeing here, but on this sheet I see 152 at the bottom, is that right?
It's 153.
Oh, it's 153. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, got it. All right.
Yes.
Well, I was mistaken. Sorry. Okay.
We'll come to the radio message in a moment, but just comparing the service request created by Heidi Fox and the whiteboard information, it's clear, just comparing the two, that the service request is detailed and contains details of a pregnant lady, but the whiteboard doesn't, for example. So would that be an important respect? My question is, would that be an important respect in which the whiteboard information was incomplete?
So the whiteboard information wasn't ever supposed to be a way we recorded every detail of every individual in every flat, but it was supposed to be a way that we could check, we could know if we'd had a previous call to that. Jason could confirm if he'd sent that information to the CU, right. And the whole room, I believe, could see it, so they could easily update them. The time that Heidi has written that service request, we were telling everybody to leave their premise.
I'll come back to that
as well.
I understand that. Did Jason Olive have access to the short incident log service request on a screen in front of him?
No, he would have overheard it in a conversation, right. Or it would have gone via the radio.
So, if Jason Olive was only working from the whiteboard information and didn't have access to the short incident log data, the detailed data which we see from the service request, what would enable him to give full details in relation to that flat to the incident ground?
That would have been a conversation that he may have overheard, or he may have had a scrap of paper with that information on.
Right. But he wouldn't, you say it may have been. Do you know?
I don't know, no.
Okay. In terms of a system, would it be fair to say that the system, that Jason Olive would not have reliable information as to the fullness of the information he was giving to the incident ground, because it wasn't entered into on the whiteboard, and he would therefore be relying on pieces of paper, yes, where the information hadn't got onto the whiteboard?
No, but that would have been the only way he could have done it. If you can imagine the incident log in front of you, the short incident log is 300 pages ready. If that was on your screen and Jason had access to that, he would have just been scrolling through and would have missed vital bits of information, such as their location and the floor number. This way, he actually was able to pass that relevant information. I understand why you're saying it was complete, because we have obviously missed a few bits of information relating to some of the ages or the conditions of some of the adults.
Was there any reason why Jason Olive wouldn't be able to have in front of him a screen showing the service requests as they were made?
There is no reason. He could have, we could have logged him on. That takes time. And again, it would be interpretation of the data. It's not something they're used to reading a vision file. That's for control staff to know. So that would have taken time to update him, to show what he was reading and to understand and interpret the data. So again, this was a much quicker method and got the information straight away to the command unit.
Quicker, maybe,
yes.
But would it be fair to say at risk of incompleteness?
No, I think there would have been a risk of incompleteness had he had access and would have been scrolling down pages and pages in very quick time. He may have missed them.
Just excuse me, just one moment. Can I ask you please to be shown LFB quadruple 02340, which which is a transcript of an LFB radio transmission. Control give information to CU7. Again, I think it's Sharon Darby. Well, I'll ask you. This is control timed at 02:48:07. Control information flat 153, CU7. And I just want to compare what's on this transcript with what's on the short incident log. Responder over, operator, Charlie Uniform 7. We've got a caller who's trapped in their flat, on flat 153 on the 18th floor, over. And I think, Mr. Documents Director, is that the totality of the message? I think there's no other page.
You think there's another page?
No, I think that's the only.
Yeah.
That is the only page. So just comparing that information, which goes by radio to CU7, with the service request details, can you help me? Why was the information we see in the service request created by Heidi Fox about 4 adults, 5 children, and the ages and the pregnancy, and indeed the inability to get out due to the smoke, not recorded or not transmitted by the radio operator to CU7?
So that's the only transmission that she made regarding that flat 153.
That is the message at 02:48.
So could I have a look at the short incident log?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Short
of course.
incident log is at 02:40:11, page 23. And that says at 2:40, that's the service request being created. There is one other message, to be fair to you. There is another message, which I will show you, which is LFB 00002031. We can just look at that. And that's all we have for that. Which is at 02:48:35.
Okay, if you can go back to the short incident log.
Yes. Yes, that's tab 23. At 02:40:11. That's the service request. At 02:40:11.
So that's one, and then at 2:41, that's where the service request completes it, and
Yes.
that's been completed by Heidi as well.
Right.
So I would imagine that she has passed that information on either through a scrap of paper or someone talking to her,
Right.
to Jason Oliffe, and then it's gone up on the whiteboard.
Okay.
But I can only assume.
I see. Can you tell us from that whether that was a message sent by radio? Because it says RT4 to CU8. This is not a service request completed by Sharon Darby.
No,
Do you know why that might be?
because I would imagine that Heidi had sent the information a different way, so it didn't go via the radio.
Right. I see.
She was sitting behind Jason Oliffe, so may have passed it directly. One of us may have picked it up and passed it on a piece of paper,
I see.
and then added it to the whiteboard.
So that's very helpful. So is it? I think what you're saying is that it's possible that you don't know that this message wasn't sent by radio, it was sent by mobile, and that the details she's completing there, although they're not on the whiteboard, were on a piece of paper and transmitted by Jason Oliffe.
Yes,
But we don't know.
we don't know.
No. All right. And those mobile, that mobile, as I think we discovered yesterday, or established yesterday, those conversations were not recorded.
No, unfortunately they weren't.
Right. Because by this stage he was on his personal mobile.
Yeah.
Jason Aliff.
However, I do remember that, and I do remember there was a pregnant lady trapped in the fire on the night. So that may have been some information that I had overheard as well,
Okay.
and that would have been passed on.
Can I go back in time a little bit into the night, to earlier in the night, and look with you at some transfer of information before you arrived? And you may not be able to help with this at all, but I just want to see how far we get.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask you please to look at the ORR at page 60? And at the top of page 60, we see a table of information being passed to CU8. It looks like 4 calls. Do you, and the time of this I should just help you with, is before 1:35, 25.
Okay, so these were the initial calls
Yes.
we started receiving.
Yes, that's right. Those are the calls that we looked at in the transcript yesterday. Would you describe those as FSG calls?
I wouldn't be able to tell from that information.
From that, okay.
With regard to the remarks, I don't know who smoke coming into the premises.
Yeah.
That's just a general comment.
It's
I'd
a
really
comment.
have to read the transcript or listen to the call.
Okay. Well, we won't go back to
No.
that tomorrow. Today, we looked at it yesterday. The question I have is, looking at the ORR, if you go to page 74 of the ORR, you can see there that at the bottom of 73 and the top of 74, here, this is a summary. I'm so sorry, I've given you the wrong one. It's page 73 we should be looking at, and we have a table at the top of the page there, and we've got some 7 calls, and this is Sharon Darby contacting CU8 and passing information about fire survival calls recently received at 1:43:13. Now, do you know whether she passed on any information earlier than that to CU8?
I don't know, no.
Okay. It looks as if by that time, by 1:43, we've got 7 or so calls passed on at 1:43, and also the calls that were passed on at 1:35 on page 60, which we looked at a minute ago. So it looks like 7 plus 4, total of 11. Now, we don't know whether the first 4 were properly FSG calls, but by 1:43, we've got 11 identified calls passed to CU8 by Sharon Darby. Would that be about right, do you think?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know.
Regard to that if I didn't see the timeline.
Okay. If we look at the operational response report at page 61 and 62, and I'm sorry to ask you to keep dotting around, at 61, we've got a number of calls there, which is a summary of FSG calls that Brigade Control have received by this time. And they start at 01:21:24, as I think you pointed out yesterday, and they run to 01:34:50. And that's some 13 calls in all. And then, if you look at page 73 and 74 again, we've got a further set of calls between 136 and 141, which had come in. And I think the total number of calls recorded by the operational response report on both of those pages, page 61 and 62, and 73 and 74, which I've just shown you, totals 23 FSG calls, 13 between 0121 and 0134, and 11 between 0136 and 0141. That's 24 calls, sorry. Do you know why only 11 of those total calls, total of 24 calls, were passed to the incident ground?
No. So can you just confirm, you're saying that from that information, only 11
Yes.
flats were passed?
Yes, it looks like from this analysis done by the LFB that although a total of some 24 calls had been, FSG calls, had been made to the fire ground before one or by 14121, only 11 had been passed to the incident ground, and those are the 11 is the 7 we've got on page 73 at 143.13, and then earlier on the 4 we looked at 135.
I wasn't involved in the creation of this report. I don't know how they classified the fire survival guidance calls and what the differences in the two tables.
Okay, all right. When we look at the summary of the radio messages at page 73 of this table, of this report, and again, you may not be able to help me with this. This is the top table, the calls which were passed by Sharon Darby to CU8. And we see 7 of them there. Can you see that there are a number of instances where information like flat number and the number of people inside aren't given?
Yes.
Okay. Now, assuming, I'm going to ask you to, that is an accurate summation of the messages that are summarised there, would the absence of flat numbers and numbers of people be in accordance with policy or not in accordance with policy?
So again, depending on the classification of the fire survival guidance call, I would be surprised if they were providing fire survival guidance and protect advice to callers that they haven't got the flat number. But again, without listening to every call, reading a transcript of every call, you can't really surmise the difficulties. Every call is so different, dependent on what the caller says, what advice you give. So looking at a blank summary, it would be unfair to say that it was against policy. You'd really need to listen to every call.
Okay, I understand what you're saying and why you say that.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get it in a slightly different way. Can I ask you to turn to policy 790 and look at paragraph 5.1. And that's the start of this passage about information transfer to the incident, about what should be passed over as soon as control has confirmed that an FSG call is in progress. Now, the reason I'm asking you this question is because in the ORR, the LFB's report, they have listened to the transcript, and this is a summary, and I'm just working from that. They have said these are fire survival calls. and that's the expression they use, and that's what Sharon Darby is passing to CU8. Looking at the policy, 5.1 says, as soon as control has confirmed that an FSG call is in progress, they will contact the incident ground and start to pass over the initial details. At this stage, it's likely to be basic information relating to the number of persons involved and their location within the property. And then if you turn to the next page, paragraph 5.5, it says that control will attempt, we've got it there, control will attempt to gather all the information on the control information form, we looked at that yesterday, and relay this information to incident as and when it becomes available. And then you've got number of flat or house, and among other things, number of persons involved, and those are the two first bullet points. I'm not sure they're necessarily in a priority order, but they are there. So my question is, if these calls that we're looking at summarised on page 73 of the ORR are properly to be characterised as fire survival calls being passed by Sharon Darby to CU8, and where they don't include the number of the flat or the number of persons involved, would that not be a departure from what the policy requires?
So that may have been the initial basic information to tell CU8 that a fire survival guidance call is in progress. It depends on each call. The calls could have lasted 10, 15, 45 minutes. So that information might have been updated on every different call. The policy does refer to the incident, the initial information, and does say it is likely to contain the flat number and the number of persons involved. But had we been dealing with a particularly difficult call, or one where we had a language barrier or something, it might have taken the control room operator longer to obtain those details, and after they had, that they may have been passed on.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to continue with this line of questioning. So I'm midstream, but I am conscious that the witness has been going for 45 minutes.
So, I mean, could we break at this point?
We could break at this point for a short break. And
5 minutes? Or should we say until 5:30?
Should we say until 5:30 and give the witness
You'd probably quite like a break again now, wouldn't you? Yes. All right. We'll break for just over 5 minutes. We'll resume at 12:30. And again, no discussion with anyone, please. Thank you. Thank you.
the picture of flat 153, and which is Met 000169112, and I was asking you lots of questions about the absence of the information which appeared on Sharon Darby's service message. What I did not do, and I'm now going to do, is to show you what turned up in this command unit by way of a record of what they got.
Okay.
And see if you can help explain how that got there. If you look, please, at MET 000015924, this is, it's going to have to be enlarged. Now, I'll just tell you what this is, because I'm going to assume you've never seen this before.
No, I haven't.
No, this is a photograph of a whiteboard taken or created within CU7 from the time that CU7 started operating fully. So we'll have to explore the precise time with others, but it was after the move from CU8 to CU7. And if you look at flat 153, just focus on the entry for flat 153, we see that the personnel in CU7 have recorded quite a lot of information about flat 153, including, and I won't trouble you with the key, but 4 adults in green, 5 children in black, and then someone's put a 3 in a ring, and then a P in a ring. Now, P in a ring means priority. Nobody could explain the 3 in a ring. And I don't imagine you'd be able to do so. But it looks as if rather more information was passed to CU7 about flat 153 than was contained on the whiteboard, where it simply said 4 adults, 5 children. Can you assist with how further detail, whatever that is, was passed to 153 than appears on the whiteboard? Where did they get do you know where they might have got the detail from that appears there for 153, which wasn't on the whiteboard?
So I would imagine that would have been through Jason Olive passing that information to CU7.
Right. Now,
So again, as we've said, the whiteboard in control might have had some basic information, but Jason might have overheard conversations or might have had notes passed to them additionally.
Right.
If you look on the other whiteboard that you showed that was in control, I believe the top entry has a flat number and 10 people. As an example, I wrote that 10 people, but I know that more information about that, the occupants of those flats went to the scene.
Okay, let's see where we go with that. That's MET 16906.
Sorry, it's the second.
So the second entry down in green.
Yeah.
Right. Were you the one with the green pen?
I wrote that. Yes.
Right. You wrote that. Do you remember writing that?
Yes.
Okay. And that's against. I'm afraid that this picture doesn't show it very well, but my version says 193. 22nd floor, and it's smudged. Can you help with? I don't know why it says 1. It says 93, but it should say 193.
Yeah, I think it's just cut the photos.
It is. I think take it from me that it is. And it says 10 people. What extra information did you have about that flat?
So I would imagine as maybe that was the first bit of information that came through. So I would have written that up, and the control officer was still on the phone to them, because then it's been annotated with 2 adults, 3 children, and then the additional instruction that we provided to them.
Right.
I'm just giving an example of how sometimes basic information went up there, but yet further details were passed to the CU via voice.
Okay, where did you get that information from? 10 people, and then someone else's. Well, where did you get 10 people from?
That would have been one of the control officers during that call.
And who wrote what looks like 2 adults, 3 children there? Do you know?
I don't know, no.
And who wrote told to leave flat? Do you know?
I believe that's Adrian's writing, but I couldn't confirm. I would just assume that.
Right. And the rest of the handwriting looks similar. Do you know whether that's his handwriting? The rest of it on that whiteboard?
I'm just assuming it was because he was there quite a lot of the time.
Okay. And 10 people, it looks like 2 adults, 3 children. If we follow that then through to the command unit whiteboard for flat 193, can we just enlarge that? That looks like, again, 2 adults, 3 children.
So that could have been updated information that would have gone.
Well, let me just ask, yes, the difficulty is we're all interpreting it together. There's a faint 1 next to the 2 on the left. One can speculate about whether that's supposed to be 12 or 2. Do you remember passing information about this flat to Control or witnessing it being passed to Control?
No, so at one point I would have had that information and written it on the whiteboard.
Right.
But again, it's speculation, but that could have been a 10, and then as they got updated information, it could have been left as a 2 and a 3, so 2 adults, 3 children.
I see.
They were told by Control staff after we'd changed the decision to leave their premise, so maybe a number did.
Right, okay.
I don't know.
All right. Now, while I'm on this, I've been asked to ask you this, so I'll see how we go. If you go to the whiteboard, which is 16912, and look at the entry for flat 192, 22nd floor. And I'm not going to do this with every flat, so this is just because I've been asked to. 192 says 22nd floor, fire entering flat, and then there's an asterisk, brackets left flat, which seems to have been deleted. And then it says, it looks like bedroom, living room, and then 2 women, 3 children. So that's gone on the whiteboard. Do you know how that information would have been transmitted to the fireground? Would that be the mobile? Or?
Oh, yeah, I would imagine that would be the mobile.
Right. And we can compare that by reading across to the CU7 whiteboard, flat 192. We just enlarge that. That shows at 192 two adults, 5 children, but doesn't say anything about fire entering flat or any of the other information we saw on the whiteboard. It just says 2 in green, which is adults, a 5 in black, which is children, and then a P in a circle. So, and that's prioritisation. We were told that by Mr. Egan. Can you help us to how why the information we see on the whiteboard about fire entering flat it doesn't enter the CU7 whiteboard?
I can only surmise that it doesn't look like any details regarding flats and smoke are written in there, but maybe that is why it's got a P and they've prioritised it.
Yeah, okay.
That would be.
And can you account for the... Yes, I see, okay. Now, turning to the formalisation of messages coming from the incident ground, are you aware that control room, I think, was only given 2 informative messages from the incident ground? And we can look at them in the short incident log.
During what time period? Just
Okay,
the first hour?
It's a good question. Let's look at them. The first one is in the short incident log at 01:14. Or rather, it's 01:16:02, in fact. 01:14 is the make-up to one aerial. So this is very early on in the incident. It's a short incident log at page 17. And it says, informative, SUP from G272, residential block of flats. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that kind of message, does it conform with a sort of standard?
Yes.
That's what an informative message looks like, is it?
Yes.
Right.
Both the message standard and within the time. So I think there's...
Okay.
From
What would
the-
that...
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we have an alert on our system if we haven't received an informative within 20 minutes of the resources being in attendance.
Right.
And if they weren't, we would prompt them and ask them for a message, but we received one within the time frame.
Okay. And how would that help you? How would that information help you in the control room at that time? What would that tell you?
It would confirm what we'd been called to, that we were dealing with a fire on the 4th floor, as the initial call stated, and that they had implemented high-rise procedure, so they were beginning to tackle the fire.
Right.
But I believe in general terms, whilst it gives the control room a picture, it also gives all the senior officers attending a picture that were actually going to the incident. So I would say it was more for them and information for them and officers monitoring rather than information for the control room.
And the next one we have is there's one at 02:04:20, which is CU7 GM Welch, now IC. But that doesn't tell you anything other than what it tells you. It doesn't tell you anything about what's happening on the fire ground.
No.
And then we have the next one at 02:42:03. That's page 23 of the short incident log. And we can see that there, informative SUP CU8. And there's quite a lot more information there than we saw before. What would that information tell you in the control room? How would that help you make decisions?
So we would have gathered that already. So it says major incident declared. We were aware of that. We were aware of the equipment that would have been in use because they'd requested that from the incident ground prior to that. Obviously, we were aware that there were a large number of fire survival guidance calls because we were the ones that were dealing with them. Yeah. With regard to the floors, I think we were already aware at 2:42 that it had spread from what the callers were telling us on those calls.
Right.
So yes, we were aware that it wasn't a fire on the 4th floor anymore.
Right. If you've only had 2 informative messages about what was happening on the fire ground coming into the control room, in that period, up to 2:42 or so, would that be normal for a substantial incident?
I would say, in my experience, sometimes it would be normal.
Right.
Yes.
Sometimes
For
it would be normal.
a large incident. we would receive an initial message and then we wouldn't receive one for an hour and a half after, yes. Especially if there'd been a number of make-ups
Right.
between the first informative.
In
and the
your
second.
in your own experience, how well equipped in terms of information would that leave you in the control room?
In my experience, we wouldn't be dependent on it. We would always be considering some possibilities if we hadn't had a message. We may occasionally have prompted the incident or the CU for a message.
Right.
But it wouldn't stop us doing our role and carrying out our role. We would just consider a number of options before we had them confirmed by the CU.
Right. Did you think at the time, come 242, that you had received enough information to be able to have your control room officers give adequate advice to callers who were calling in?
Yes, by 242 we had changed the advice.
I'm going to come to the change in the advice, but in terms of information coming from the incident ground, by 242, did you think that you were getting enough information to be able to make decisions, or did you think that the information was insufficient that you were getting from the incident ground?
I think if we'd had some further information with regard to the location of BA crews and where they were, we would have been able to pass that on to callers and made an assessment by there. But again, at that time, we weren't informing callers that we had fire crews there and they were on their way.
And what information about the location of BA crews were you receiving in the incident, in the control room?
None. We
None.
didn't have any information.
Did you take any steps to ask the command unit for that information?
No, we were aware at one point Adrian Fenton was on the phone to the incident, and when we were aware that they were struggling to get past the 15th floor.
What time is that, do you think?
I think that was one of the reasons that we decided to change the advice, so it would have been around 2:25.
Did you have no information at all prior to, let's say, 2:30 about whether BA crews had been deployed to flats where FSGs were coming from?
No.
None. Can I just ask you to look at the control debrief document, which is tab 54 of the documents bundle? We looked at it yesterday. And turn in it to page 4, please. First of all, at the bottom of the page, and I don't think we looked at this yesterday, but at the bottom of the page, this is part of the debrief we had you had in July 2017. It says no info coming back from incident ground as to progress, stroke rescues, stroke flats cleared. At the time you did this debrief, well, can I just first ask, who said that at this meeting?
I would imagine we all did.
You all did?
Yeah.
And did you all say that because the absence of information coming back from the incident ground about those matters was a problem?
No, I think it was a consensus of information that we didn't receive any information back. I can't remember the conversation, whether we had been asked if it was a problem or if we had just volunteered that there was no information coming back to us.
Why was it relevant to mention the absence of information coming back from the incident ground if it wasn't a problem?
Again, I can't remember the context of it, but we didn't receive any information back into the control room regard to progress and rescues and those attempting to reach the flats where we had fire survival guidance calls in progress.
Okay. Just a little higher up the page, a third of the way down, there's a bullet point that says control knew firefighters were being committed to rescue. We can just have that highlighted. It's the second part of the first yellow chunk, second bullet point. Do you see it says control knew firefighters were being committed to rescue, expectation this will happen? Is that right, that control did at least know that firefighters were being committed to rescue?
No, I think that's what they believed, and that we maintain an expectation that that will happen.
Right. So to be clear, this document isn't recording the fact that control did know that firefighters were being committed. It's recording the expectation that it would.
It's recording the expectation of control staff, and you can hear that on the calls, that firefighters will be committed to rescue. I would imagine that we would have all assumed, and maybe from the first informative that indicated that their high-rise procedure implemented, that firefighters had been committed to the incident.
But you didn't know?
But with regard to the location of those firefighters in the building, no, we didn't know.
No. Did you know whether BA crews had been committed in response to a particular FSG call, even though you didn't know where they were in the building?
No.
Right. Now I'm going to go on to the change to the stay put policy. And Mr. Chairman, although it's a change in topic, it might be sensible to start it. I don't mind. I'm in your hands.
How are you doing generally?
I think I'm doing quite well. So, if it pause now.
It would be better to pause now rather than break a topic, so
Yes.
long as we're not pressed for the odd few minutes at the end of the afternoon.
Well, if we are, I can apply to make them up.
I think it'd be wiser to stop now. We're going to move to another topic, and it's a bit disruptive to break it up after 5 minutes. So we'll stop now until 2 o'clock, and please don't talk about your evidence over the break.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.